Elaine Pofeldt, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Henry. It's an honor.
So, I got to tell you, I was in a bookstore about a year and a half ago. We were at dinner, and my 3 and 5 year old, probably at the time, were getting kind of restless. And so, you got to walk them around the restaurant or do something. So, we went next door to the bookstore, and they looked at some books, and I looked at some books, and they ended up buying the Encanto. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but the Encanto board book. And then I saw this bright yellow book on the shelf called Tiny Business, Big Money, which coincided with me just recently starting my own tiny business. So I definitely had the first part of the book. I'm not sure I had the second part down yet. But I bought your book and found it really useful. I think it's really insightful about maybe where the world of work is going. It's certainly part of my own personal journey where about a year and a half ago I started working for myself, and I think I can do it as a one person business. So I'm excited to discuss all of that with you today. So let me start by just asking you, Elaine, like what's your backstory about your career, your life that sort of led you to see the themes in both of your books? So the $1 million one person business and tiny business, big money.
My backstory is that I went freelance in 2007. I had
Mm-hmm.
twins who were premature, and then I had my daughter Sarah, who's now 17. They're now 20. And I was working at Fortune Small Business Magazine, which was part of the Fortune Group at Time Inc. I had my dream job. I loved working there, doing long form features. And I ran the website for Fortune Small Business. But what I found was my life was becoming all logistics as a mother with three children, ages 4 and under, working full time. So they were very generous about allowing me to work from home. But I found I needed more flexibility to enjoy the moments that come every day and will never come back again.
Mm-hmm.
Being in the park with your kids and having a really great time on a sunny day, and then having to race back and do an interview. I wanted more control over my schedule. And I went freelance, and I was writing about a lot of different types of entrepreneurs, but I found I was most curious about the one person businesses, maybe just because I wanted to run my own business better. And I had a blog for Forbes about this. And one day I came across the census statistics for non employer businesses. This was what I wrote about in the $1 million one person business. And I noticed that there were a number of businesses breaking 1 million in revenue with no employees on payroll. And I love data. I don't know where this comes from, but I love slicing and dicing data. So I went through the census tables, and I noticed that they were across many different industries. It wasn't just one, like e-commerce. And I started writing blog posts about it for Forbes, and they would go viral, and people were extremely curious about it, much more so than anything else I had ever written about. And I had probably written thousands of articles by that point because I've been a journalist for a long time. So I thought, who are these people? And people were asking me for case studies. So I started hearing from some of them. And then for several years, I wrote profiles of them. And then a literary agent reached out and said this could be a book. She was noticing they were going viral, and there was a lot of curiosity. And that became the $1 million one person business. And I have covered many more entrepreneurs since I wrote that book, and learned that they go down different paths. So that led to Tiny Business, Big Money, where
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they stay a high end boutique business, and they just prefer to maybe stay at 3 million in revenue and use
Mm-hmm.
contractors or
Right.
outsourcing or something like that to keep the work done. Other times they become a small business. So one example is Megan Telpner, who was a nutritionist, and at first she was just working with everyday people in her clinic. Then she wanted to scale her messaging about healthy eating, and she started an online cooking school, and that became the $1 million business. She staffed up to about 7 at one point, then she scaled back to about 3, and that seems to be her ideal size. So more of a traditional small business, and then some have become startups. And an example would be Brook Linen. It was a husband and wife. They started selling direct to consumer sheets in patterns that would appeal more to men, like window pane plaids. And that really took off. They raised venture capital, and now it's a pretty substantial size business, and some of them have even exited. One example is Birch Benders, also a husband and wife team that make pancakes. They make pancake mix, healthy pancake mix, and that was sold, and I think it was sold twice actually. So that's another route. But what they all have in common is they help the entrepreneur not just build a job replacement and a salary replacement, but wealth, because now the
Hmm.
business is a valuable property that can be sold or aggregated. And to me, that's a fascinating trend because that didn't used to happen. People would not want to buy a one person business. Now they do. So I'm going to pause
Right.
there. I said a lot there.
No, that's great. Your sort of personal story, I wanted to ask you about too, because my wife is a writer. She's a freelance writer as well, has her own business. But I feel like, you can tell me if I'm completely wrong, I feel like writers like to call themselves writers, not business owners. Or so they're usually saying they're freelance writers, but they're essentially the one person business as well. So do you consider yourself to have a one person business in all the things you have going on? Is that how you view your own business?
Well, I consider myself to have a tiny business because I actually have 4 employees now.
Mm, okay.
My children work in the business,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
you'll see circulating on LinkedIn. My 14-year-old son just went by, and he designed the Canva social media icons for an event that I'm doing at the library. And my 2 older daughters in Tiny Business Big Money, there's a chart in the back where we sliced and diced a lot of census data to find the most
Hmm.
capital efficient businesses in America. And we can get into that later. It's really interesting stuff. But they're really good at math, far better than I am in Excel. And so they said, "Mom, you're laughing like a hyena." Like when we were going through the data, because I love that stuff. But they work in my business, so I actually run payroll, and I have a real, an employer business now. But I was for many years a one person business.
Hmm.
And to answer your question, which is a good one, I definitely think there's a shift in identity that takes place where you're saying to yourself, what else can I do with this skill set?
Yeah.
Because when I started as a freelance writer, that was 2007, I was mostly doing magazine work, maybe a little online work. That changed a lot over the years. I started doing content marketing. I
Yep.
started doing public speaking. I started doing ghostwriting of books for other people, ghostwriting of articles, writing coaching. It's all basically using the same skill sets as a business writer with a specialty in entrepreneurship. I just did a workshop at Borough of Manhattan Community College where I did the exercises from the $1 million one person business on how to find your own unique niche business after doing a free library event that sold out and finding people were really interested in this. I don't always know when I do these things what is going to strike a chord.
Hmm.
And so I understand where your wife is coming from in that why did we get into this whole thing? We love writing,
Yeah.
we would do it for free, but we also have to make a living. So we try to leverage our skills and use what we do best in order to help other people and bring joy in whatever ways that we can. So I think letting go of the writer identity, I do see myself as a writer, but I also see myself as someone who does have a business strategy. I
Hmm.
look at what my revenue streams are. I have a bookkeeper. I have a
Yep.
tax accountant. I run it like a professional business. I did in the beginning. I just had an Excel sheet with my invoices on it. And I think
Right.
a lot of people do that. They're just getting their feet wet. They're seeing, do I even like doing this whole thing? And then when it starts getting a little more robust, you say, hey, I'm losing organization here. I need to do this in a more professional way. Maybe I need an LLC,
Hmm.
or an S corp, or whatever you may need. Or I need professional advice on a couple of things. I need a good independent contractor agreement, and you start to get into the operations a little bit. But writer is far more romantic, right, than
Yeah.
than business owner. But I also find that's true in other businesses too. If someone is a hairstylist, they think of themselves as a hairstylist, not
True.
a hair salon owner necessarily. They might, but they might not.
Yeah. Maybe the difference is, I mean, you talked about it, but it, as a freelance writer or hairstylist, you're sort of trading your time one for one with your skill, and the cap on your growth is your own personal time. And if you're viewing yourself like a business, you're trying to leverage your time. So if you have courses you sell, you can do the writing of the course once and sell it multiple times, and then you've got some serious leverage on your time, which is more like running a business instead of sort of selling your service for hours, right? It is a big difference in mindset.
Oh, it's definitely a different mindset. And that's one reason I wrote the book, because
Mm-hmm.
these case studies give you an example of what that mindset looks like on the ground. Joey Healy is an eyebrow stylist. Speaking of stylists, what he used to do is go up and down the streets of Manhattan working on the eyebrows of wealthy women in Manhattan in their apartments. But then he said, hey, I'm kind of walking all over the place. That's time that I'm not being paid. Why don't I open a small studio? So he opened a little one man studio and he perfected the Joey Healy eyebrow method. And then he started private label manufacturing his own makeup because he wanted to add to what he made from each visit. So you
Mm-hmm.
come in and get
Right.
styled, and then he gives you the brown makeup or whatever. And then he started licensing out the method to other stylists at other salons. So they now became Joey Healy licensed eyebrow
Right.
stylists. And he one thing he invested in was a publicist, and the
Mm-hmm.
publicist got him on some big daytime shows. Then he opened a studio in Greenwich Village, New York, which is very expensive real estate. And the pandemic hit, and he was not considered an essential business. So he went online, and basically
Mm-hmm.
his business was shut down overnight. And he looked in his basement. He had a clean basement with all the makeup, and he said, that makeup is going to get us through the pandemic. And he started giving people lessons on how to style their eyebrows on Zoom calls. And then he started offering consultations, and that took off, and it got him through the pandemic. Now he's back up and running again, but that's the kind of imagination and resilience
Yeah.
you really need. And you have to be willing to just try things that you had not done before. Elisa Shiro, meeting planner in New York City, she had about $1 million one person business. Pandemic hits, nobody's
Mm-hmm.
doing in person meetings. She didn't use Zoom prior to the pandemic. She learned it, learned how to, she did celebrity events. So she started getting celebrities to join the earnings calls for big companies to liven it up when everybody was locked in their houses. And she actually grew her business to 1.5 million in
Wow.
revenue and hired two employees to do video and other things. So we can learn a
Wow.
lot from these people who are out there doing it. And I think one thing I've learned is just don't wait for someone to give you permission. A lot of people are
Yeah.
figuring things out as they go along.
Yeah.
And that's part of it. You say, what are my skills? And there are some exercises in the $1 million one person business to sort of figure this out. Like, what do people tell you you're good at? Or what do you love and do for free, but maybe people are offering to pay you money because you might not even be noticing it, but other people are noticing it. And
Yep.
then you think about, well, would I actually like to charge money for this? I go to hot yoga every day. I love hot yoga. I don't want to be a yoga teacher. I don't want it to be a business because I have workaholic tendencies. So you can just imagine what would happen with hot yoga, right? I try to keep in balance, like all one person businesses, right? There's always more work to be done. So I just want
Yeah.
that to be just for
Yep.
pure health, fitness, wellness, socializing, not work. So you may decide I'm really into this thing, but it's not what I want to monetize. And that's part of the whole thinking process that these folks have really generously shared how they got to where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to shift a little bit. I know you're into the data, so I wanted to ask you sort of about the trend of people working for themselves and becoming one person businesses. Did you know how many freelancers or one person businesses there are in the United States and how the numbers are growing and maybe what's driving that growth?
There's usually about 32 or 33 million small businesses in the US, and the numbers might not be so good right now because of the pandemic. With some of the records, they're coming out a little bit later. But basically, almost all of them are non employer businesses. And by non employer, it means they don't run payroll. So it could be
Mm-hmm.
just me. It could be, me and my spouse. It could be me and my friend, and still be called a non-employer business if we don't run payroll, and we just take money out of the business to pay ourselves when we need to be paid, just by literally moving it out of the bank account for the business.
Yep.
So the majority are one person businesses. There are about 41,000 non-employer businesses that have gotten to 1 million and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that, so less than 1%
Mm-hmm.
are in that tier. Um, that tells you how elite they are in terms of
Yeah.
their business accomplishments. But I think there will be more, and the numbers have grown every year since I've been studying this in 2012. And I think it's because they freely share information. There are courses online, there are YouTubers, there are so many free resources. Plus, people like to get together. For instance, Fathom is a new tool that I've been using to record Zoom calls. I learned about it from a podcaster, and it saves me a lot of time in my business by it does an AI transcript, kind of like Otter, but then it also has an AI summary. So if I'm doing coaching calls for someone on their book, and I remembered they said something super smart about a certain topic 3 weeks ago, I can use that to get there. Well, I've told about 10 people about it because it saved me so much time in my business on transcriptions. So I think there's a lot of that goes on among the one person business crowd because we like meeting each other. We know that there's not too much work to go around. I mean, more,
Mm-hmm.
we don't want all the work for ourselves because we can't do it all.
Mm-hmm.
We may bring our friends into projects. I think we're kind of friendly competitors compared to big companies, which are very cutthroat sometimes when they're competing with each other.
I'm curious. I wanted to ask you about, and we'll go through them one by one, but a couple trends happening in the work world that I think are all contributing to people ultimately working for themselves. So, number one, remote work. Since the pandemic, the growth of remote work, it would be one trend. The second would be like shorter work week or 4 day work week, which you hear in the news come up every so often and more frequently than in the past. And then the third, the big one, would be AI. And I think really all three of those are actually probably kind of gateways to people working for themselves. So maybe we can go through each of those. Like, let's start with remote work. Do you think that's adding or subtracting one person businesses to the world? The trend toward remote.
It's definitely adding because I think more people build confidence that they could work remotely from wherever they were, their apartment, their home, their coffee shop, and they learned what tools work best. They learned how to conduct a Zoom call from Starbucks, things like that empowered them. And so when their company says you won't get anything done if you work from home, they know that it's not correct.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. And plus, some people started side businesses. There were a lot of new business registrations. They were going up in record numbers during the pandemic. So people were bored and they tried things that had maybe been in the back of their mind for a long time.
Yep.
That definitely contributed. Plus, people, I think, working parents, caregivers, pet owners saw, wow, my life is so much easier if I don't have to get into the car or take a train into the city or
Yeah.
wherever it is to get to work. I can manage my life better. So when I'm working, I'm focused. I'm not worried about having to race home and pick my child up from daycare or whatever is sort of adding to their psychic load every day. Some of it was removed. And then when they had to go back in, they said, this is really not necessary. I know here, I live in New Jersey, and the public transit never really recovered from the pandemic. So it's very unpredictable. Sometimes it should take me about 50 minutes to get into the city from
Mm-hmm.
New York City, from where I live. Sometimes it takes me 3 hours.
Oof.
Why? I have no idea. I've tried buses, trains, cars. So people are dealing with that every day,
Yeah.
and it's too
Wow.
stressful. So that's one factor too, is just I think the transit systems lost people. They weren't kept in good repair. A lot of people are driving instead of taking public transit. So
Mm-hmm.
then going into the office is such a pain in the neck. People, I think, finally just quit and start their own business. Um,
Yeah.
the AI trend is interesting too because I think you could bring efficiencies to your job, but if they know that you're doing it, they may not like it. Some companies, the really forward thinking ones, are saying go to it, tell us what you're doing because we want to do it company wide. And some feel like I remember reading about one content firm where the employer had a number of bloggers, and they were writing one or two blogs a day, and he drastically increased the number of blogs to something like 30 or 40, and it created this big uproar in the media saying that they could use AI. But as a writer, and your wife was probably saying this too, I had AI. I had my son show me ChatGPT, and I said, have
Hmm.
it write an article about $1 million one person businesses. And what it came out with, some of it was just plagiarized,
Yeah.
and then other stuff sounded good at first, but when I read it, it just was not accurate. It didn't make
Yep.
sense. And I think if you do it with a subject that you know well enough, where you know where the errors are, you'll see
Yep.
it could be okay for a bio on your website, or how to get to our office or something like that. But I don't think it's really reached that level of perfection yet.
No.
But you can at least experiment with it at
Yep.
home, and or in your own business. In an office, you have to do what they say. Um, did I
Yeah.
cover what you wanted to address? I think I might have
Yeah.
missed.
No, that's right. Yeah. The AI stuff, if you use it right, I agree with everything you said. ChatGPT is not there yet, but it could give you the starting point for 50 blog articles instead of you looking at a blank page, and then you could edit, or edit in your own personal experience, your own style of writing to it. So it's like an accelerant for sure to a lot of things. It's the same with coding. If you were to, part of your job or part of your business was coding, I have friends that are coders that say like they spend a ton of their time in there now. They're just sort of driving the AI to do the coding for them instead of 6, 8 months ago they were doing all of it manually. So that, how are you seeing that in the ability for people to get to $1 million as a one person business? I feel like the AI stuff probably could be like pouring gasoline on a fire for those types of businesses if used
I
right.
agree. I think it's very exciting. I think it may take away some jobs, but I think it will add more businesses where
Hmm.
people get to keep the
Yeah.
results of their labor in the form of profits. And I don't think
Yep.
that there's any set credential for being a business owner, so it's a very empowering trend. Whereas to work in certain companies, maybe you have to have a certain degree or have gone to certain types of schools. That's not true with a business. You can pretty much start one unless it's a specialized one like a CPA
Hmm.
firm. Um, but what has happened over the last few decades is it takes fewer and fewer people to get to $1 million in revenue. And
Hmm.
probably it was like in the 1990s when they started putting things in the cloud. Venture capitalists started saying we can't find businesses to invest in because they don't need enough money, and if we don't put enough money in, our exit isn't that big. And it was because they didn't have to buy servers anymore. But
Right. Wow.
what happened was it democratized access to starting a business, and many people could work on a business remotely from wherever. They could use QuickBooks or FreshBooks, cloud-based tools, and it brought down the cost of running a business. So barriers to raising capital were not as relevant. And that's one reason I'm so interested in the one person business, because certain areas of business like the startups, you need venture capital to really scale.
Hmm.
But many people are closed out of those markets. And why is like a whole podcast unto itself. But the reality is with the one person business, they're mostly self financed and bootstrapped. And I think what will happen is as more of those owners build a valuable property and sell it, they will become investors, and they're going to see the potential in the other one person businesses who maybe would get missed by Silicon Valley and traditional investors because they're not in the same networks.
Yeah.
So to me, it's one of the most exciting economic trends, but and it's actually going pretty fast. It's not going fast enough for me, but it's still going pretty fast.
Yeah. So where do you think all this is going? We were talking before we started recording a little bit, but um, if you were to predict in the future, how many of these one person businesses are there? Like, what does the world of work, working, having a job, working for yourself look like in 10 or 20 years, do you think?
Well, it does seem like most companies I work with as a freelancer have gotten far leaner. So if
Hmm.
you have a job at a company, I think you'll be with a smaller team of core people and a lot of external people who are temp workers, contractors, consultants, freelancers who are brought in when there's work to be done, but they're not kept all the time. The loyalty trend died a long time ago, and I think we see this with a lot of tech workers are starting to feel the sting of that, that workers have been treated as disposable. Yet at the same time, there is a backlash against that in big companies. And I'm part of a project called Social Capital, and we write about companies that care about people, the employees, their customers, and their community. And there are big companies like Delta Airlines that are really putting people first. So there are some where you could work there and have what people thought of as a good job 30 or 40 years ago, when there is loyalty to the team and the team feels some loyalty. But the majority of companies are very quarterly profit,
Hmm.
bottom line driven, and have unfortunately, I think, broken that contract with the workers. And I think people go through one or two layoffs and they start to feel like they gave their heart and soul to a company, because jobs are hard to keep. They're a lot of work. They cut into your personal time. There's a lot of sacrifice involved. And then if they just lay you off because they're a little bit over budget, that really hurts people in their heart. They
Yeah.
may say they're going into it and being dispassionate, but when it really happens to them, they feel bitter. And they have a lot of valuable skills. So that's a big part of the contingent that I write about. It's people who just they didn't give up. They just got mad and started their own business,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and and they have become very successful because they learned how to do things professionally. They know what good looks like. They have great networks. They had a lot of friends in the office, and maybe some of those people are also running one person businesses. I mean, it's funny because I started my business when my kids were little,
Hmm.
and I'm still working with a lot of the same people. They've moved around to different companies and they hire me for different types of things. But
Hmm.
we basically formed a relationship working in an office somewhere a
Yeah.
while back, and we kept it going. And I think that's going to be one of the most important trends, is the strength of relationships, because your loyalty isn't necessarily to a company, which could be acquired and have its name changed or get taken over by a company with different values. It's really to the people that you've formed working relationships with, where no matter where they go, you enjoy working together,
Hmm.
you collaborate well together. That I think will be very important for anybody in the one person business. And it could be
Hmm.
done online, it could be done on WhatsApp rather, and LinkedIn, wherever, just as long as you're doing it, because people have different ways of communicating. My son likes to communicate on Discord with
Hmm.
video gamers. I wouldn't
Right.
go on Discord. I don't know how to use it, but you have to find your tribe and keep those relationships going, because that's usually where the leads come from on great projects, great opportunities, and also try to give back to the one person business community. If you hear of something,
Hmm.
send it to somebody, a grant that maybe they could apply for, or an opening or a project in a different discipline from your own. That really helps people build their business more, I think, than just marketing and traditional ways of building a business.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of that, the layoffs, you could be loyal to a company and all of a sudden you're laid off. It's unfortunately with the AI stuff, I think a lot of that is coming. A lot of sweeping layoffs to professions that seemed stable before. And the irony is, like, sort of the mentality is that starting your own business is risky and getting a job isn't risky. But when you own your own business, and a lot of the things you would learn is you shouldn't have one client for your business, because if you lose the client, you lose your business. And
Exactly.
a job is essentially a one client business. And so you're either, it's a light switch, all of your income's turned on or turned off. So it may feel risky to start your own business, but you're not going to get turned off on your income and the value of your assets when you own your own business. It's a completely different mindset. I think it's a big leap in kind of how you view the world, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I should be interviewing you, Henry, because you put that so well. It's
Thanks.
true. Well, think about this. People say businesses fail, right? That's why you shouldn't start one.
Hmm.
Do people say jobs fail? Oh, people
Right.
get fired, they get laid off. So you should never get a job. That would be a waste of your college education.
Right.
Nobody ever says that. And I think it's you would probably like a book called The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto, who was an award winning public school teacher. He passed away a couple of years ago, but the book is online and it's for free if you can find it. He goes through the history of public schools and why they are the way they are. And basically, they wanted to transform people who lived in agricultural communities into industrial workers. So they
Hmm.
have bells and, things that make you ready to punch a clock in a factory. I guess they don't have a punch clock anymore, but, or maybe they do. I don't know. But they were training people to fit into that machine. And the machine really served the owners.
Yeah.
It didn't really serve the workers that much, especially now. A lot of the good jobs in those industries are gone. They've found all these
Yeah.
economies, quote unquote, and decimated a lot of communities. And then even the corporate white collar jobs are similar. You have people doing the jobs of two and three people, and they're not using AI
Yeah.
yet. They're doing
Hmm.
it themselves, and it's a little bit thankless in a lot of companies. I don't want to say all because
Hmm.
the reporting we're doing at Social Capital, I think, has showed me that there are a lot of caring companies too. I
Yep.
was a little down on some of the big companies, but it's given me some faith that there are some, and they're talking to each other and trying to make it better. But in the meantime, there's a lot of people that they are going to lose their jobs and they don't want that kind of turmoil. They want control over their income. I believe that even if you have a job, everyone should have at least one form of side income
Yeah.
that they can scale up or down. Maybe you do speaking on the side. I remember
Hmm.
interviewing a guy who he would make about $17,000 a year through speaking engagements at schools. It was a little bit of extra money, but
Yeah.
that's not pocket change. You could invest that in the stock market. You could put it in a 401k, multiply it, and
Yep.
it could give you a little bit of security, or it could give you the confidence to quit your job if you're
Right.
being maltreated. And I think that's what's changing is especially
Yeah.
with younger generations. My son, who's 14, was on YouTube and I said, "What are you watching?" He's like, "Mom, I got to get some passive income." And I said, "Robert, haven't you read my book?"
Yeah.
He's like, "It's not cool enough because it's his mom." But
Exactly.
there are a lot of really interesting gurus out there who
Yeah.
really know what they're doing and they're sharing a lot of great strategies. A lot of it is about consistently showing up when you really boil it down, consistently showing up to learn how to do things, to
Hmm.
experiment. A lot of people who start a business will, if they read a case study of someone, they may feel disappointed that it doesn't have a recipe. Just add a half cup of chickpeas, and then you have a business. But it doesn't work that way. It's very much about learning on the fly. And if you study five different e-commerce businesses, and I encourage people to read case studies across every platform you can, you're going to see some similarities and you'll see some differences. Some might market something on Instagram, some might do it by email, some might do
Hmm.
Amazon internal pay-per-click marketing. There are many different ways that you can get to the same result of 1 million in revenue. So part of it is what you're comfortable with. Where do you already have skills? What are you willing to learn? If are you willing to put the time in to learn some other new things? And some of those also blow up from time to time. They change their algorithms. So a lot
Yeah.
of these entrepreneurs, by the time I write about them and the book comes out, they've changed what they do because they have to outrun the Google algorithm. So you have to
Yes.
be a lifelong learner and just say, look, I'm never going to have this nailed. It's kind of like parenthood, right? You read like a zillion parenting articles, then you have a kid and they do something that you didn't predict.
Yeah.
They're mad at you for no reason. You feel like I've been such a nice parent. Like, why are they talking to me that way? And it doesn't go by the book all the time. So you
Yeah.
have to be willing to enjoy the journey. And someone who is only going to be happy if they get to a certain revenue number is kind of missing the point. I mean, you do
Mhm.
have to make enough to live, but it doesn't go according to a set time schedule. You have to wake up every day and say, I want to do this. I'm really interested in finding out if this whole pay per click thing works, or
Yeah.
talking to a few people who are doing it, or going to this meetup and seeing what this presenter says. Whatever
Yep.
it is, you have to be into it. If you're not into it, you might be in the wrong business, or maybe you're not into entrepreneurship. Only the individual can decide that. But I think there's a lot of people that they it's almost like exercise after New Year's Eve. You see them out in their sweatsuits, their new running shoes. It's freezing cold on
Yeah.
January
Yeah. Yeah.
1st, right? And they're out there, and you know they're only going to be out there for 2 or 3 days because they were out there to wear the sweatsuit and say that
Yeah.
they went running. They're not out there saying, "Hey, you know what? I really hate running, but I want to get to the point that I don't hurt when I go running. I actually can enjoy it and enjoy the scenery and enjoy talking to a friend or enjoy competing in a race, whatever this journey turns out to be. I'm in it to experience whatever it's going to give me." And I think if you can embrace that mindset, which takes some discipline, then if you have a few bad weeks where
Yeah.
nobody's buying, you could say, wow, what a great laboratory. I was trying that sales pitch on so many different people in so many different markets. Not a single person responded to it. Something's wrong with that pitch. What
Right.
am I doing wrong? I need to talk to some other people who will give me blunt feedback. And if you go into it like that, it can be fun, but you also have to have some runway. So maybe spousal income,
Yeah.
savings, some kind of cushion so you're not operating out of desperation. I never
Hmm.
recommend that anybody just quit their job right away to start a business. Sometimes you get fired or laid off, in which case you have no choice but to hustle. But if you have a little bit of money saved, then you can experiment. Or
Yep.
you just have some money coming in. You get another side job, you drive for Uber, do something so that you're not in scarcity and fear. Because then
Yeah.
when you're in fear and scarcity, you can't even think. Your brain
Yeah.
is hijacked by the fear. So you're not going to come up with very creative ideas. You're in emergency mode. So you want to always stay out of emergency mode with a business.
Hmm. Yeah. It's that's what's so amazing about the opportunity of the internet, though, because you can have a full time job, you can start a side hustle, you can you can basically sustain for a while without earning any money because you're interested in it. Like that is such a cool concept that you can go farther for longer before earning money because you can pick something that's really interesting to you. And then it can potentially start kicking off income and you can see, is this an opportunity that I can leave my job? And I think that that opportunity is amazing in this day and age.
It's so easily accessed too because you can go onto a platform like Upwork. I did an event once
Yeah.
with Upwork. We had about 800 people on that Zoom call. I think that was the biggest online event I've done. And they're all over the world and they're accessing it and able to tap into the US market, learn an incredible amount. I mean, imagine you're in Bangladesh and now you can serve the US market and maybe charge US prices. Your potential to change your situation is so great, and you
Yeah.
can learn from people all over the world. That's the other thing with the internet is best practices. If you're a freelancer, I'm sure your wife experiences this. You're on teams sometimes where you might have sometimes like on the teams I'm on, the tech people might be located in India, and maybe there are some slightly different ways things are done business wise, but you're learning
Hmm.
them, you're just soaking them up through osmosis, and you might bring them back to your other clients as a best practice because now you know about it. And same thing with the other partners on the project, they're learning from you too, and they're learning. I mean, you learn social things too, like if you're working with clients in certain countries, maybe this is how a call starts with small talk. Maybe in other countries it doesn't, but you
Mm.
become so versatile just by doing these projects and experimenting that all of a sudden you can say, oh, wait a minute, you know what? I'm American and the people in Australia speak English too. And if I am willing to do a call every night at 9 p.m., I could open up a whole new global market. because it's early for them. And that's the kind of thing, by going online you'll find out about. So if you ever feel like there's no work out there, because we all have that feeling sometimes, like, oh, it's been really slow this week, I hope the
Yeah.
economy isn't crashing, and then ideally you have a friend who will talk you down from the cliff. But when I get into that scarcity mindset, or like people are paying me a little more slowly and I'm worried about the economy, I'll get on the phone with a friend and say, let's take inventory of work that we could do if push came to shove, things that
Yep.
maybe we didn't really want to do, that we're behind on, we should be doing, but we were doing the more exciting work. And when you start ticking that off, you realize there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
In a pinch, you could do temp work, you could drive for Uber, you could do a lot of things
Yeah.
to keep the business going. And um, the more you go online and read and learn, the more you'll tap into things you might not have even known about.
Yep. Well, Elaine, I really appreciate you coming on today. Where do you want people to try to connect with you if they'd like that?
I love hearing from people on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, where I'm under my own name. And I do write back. It makes me a better journalist to know what you're thinking about. So please send me your questions. Let me know your story. Maybe I can write about you from one of the outlets I contribute to. I love hearing from entrepreneurs and knowing what's going on the front lines.
That's great. Thanks a lot for coming on.